Okay, so we left off in the middle of chapter 7 on page 219. And let me just summarize where we left off, and then I'll say the blessing. We're in the midst of the story of the judge Gideon, and he is about to fight the Midianites and maybe Amalekites also, and other people from the east. And he whittles down the forces based on what seems like a random thing. Go down to the water and see how they bring the water up to their mouths. And with that God determines who are the 300 of the fighting force. Then at night, he goes down to the encampment of the Midianite Amalekites and hears someone telling someone else about a dream that they had. Okay, and so I'll say the bracha, and we'll just read the English from verse 13 on page 219. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. So verse 13 there, 219, which we had read last time. And when Gideon came, behold, there was a man telling a dream unto his fellow. Right? Somebody telling his as somebody else what he had just dreamed. Behold, I dreamed the dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian, and came unto the tent, and smote it that it fell, and turned it upside down that the tent lay flat. Right? So this barley cake rolls into the camp, rolls onto this tent, and manages to kill everybody in the tent and destroy the tent. And his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and all the host. So somehow these two Midianites, there's one Midianite, knows what this dream means. Okay, so they know that Gideon is there waiting to attack, maybe at dawn. And this guy somehow knows that this cake of barley knocking down the tent that he dreamed means that it's Gideon, and he's going to be able to defeat the Midianites. Okay, the likelihood, it's just interesting. There's just interesting stuff in this chapter, that lends one to make it hard to believe. How could a Midianite, unless God gave this Midianite the power of dream interpretation, which we don't know about, how is this Midianite supposed to know that that's what that dream means? So we go on. We'll read, I guess we'll read 15 to the end of the chapter. Vayehi, just a sec, here comes Marlene. Just a second. There she is. Okay, so we're on page 219, and I just summarize where we're up to in the context of this story. Vayehi chishmoa Gidon et mispar hachalom v'et shivro vayishtachu vayashav el machane Yisrael vayomer kumu ki natan Adonai biyadchem et machane Midian. So when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down. That he worshipped. No, that he worshipped? No, I don't like the translation here. The way I'm translating it seems to make more sense. When Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed down and returned to the Israel camp and said, let's get up let's more than get up. Let's start the battle because God has given into your hands the Midianite camp. Vayachatz et shlosh ma'ot ha'ish, shlosha roshim, vayitain shofarot biad kulam, v'chadim rekim, v'lapidim betoch hakadim. And so he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, 3 heads. I'll go with this translation here because it makes sense from a military translation. So he divided the 300 into 3 groups, and he gave shofars to everyone, and empty vessels, which are translated here as pitchers, and torches to be put into the pitchers. Yair Lapid, a parliamentary official leading one of the political parties in Israel, the same word. Lapidim is plural of lapid, meaning torch. Okay, obvious. So his father is an immigrant, Yair Lapid's father, and so many immigrants with European Ashkenazi sounding names changed their names to a Hebrew name, right? So David Ben-Gurion was Green, was Shimon Peres, I forget what, Persky maybe, something like that. Make it into an Israeli sounding name, like, and so what Lapid was before it was Lapid, I don't remember, but it might have something to do with fire. Maybe it was Firestein, who knows, and becomes Lapid in Israel. Anyway, 17. So they all have shofars, and they have empty pitchers with a torch in it. Vayomer alehem, mimeni tir'u, v'chein ta'asu, v'hinei anochi ba biktsei hamachaneh, excuse me, v'haya ka'asher e'eseh kain ta'asun. And he said to them, Gideon says to them, watch what I do. In other words, so more literally, from me you'll see, and then you'll do. So just do what I do, and when I come to the edge of the camp, what I do, you do. 18. V'takati bashofar, anochi v'chol asher iti, utikatem bashofarot, gamatem, sevivot kol hamachaneh, va'amartem la'adonai ulegidon. So I'm going to blow the shofar, and all who are with me, and you'll blow the shofar, also you, around the whole camp, and say, for God and Gideon. So blow the shofar and say, for God and Gideon. 19, Vayavo Gidon, Umea ish asher ito, biktsei hamachaneh, Rosh ha'ashmoret hatichona, ach hakem hekimu et hashomrim, vayitkeu bashofarot, vanafot sakadim asher biyadam. So Gideon came, and the 100 men with him, to the edge of the camp, the beginning of the middle watch, right? I guess there are 3 watches for the nighttime hours. So the nighttime hours are 12 hours divided into 3 4-hour segments. So this is the end of the 4th hour of night, the beginning of the 5th hour. So it's the beginning of the middle watch. Just as the guards were getting up, and they blew the shofars and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. So remember, the pitchers had torches in them. So they broke the torch. So I guess they're going to set fire to the camp. Verse 20 on page 221, Leon. Vayitke'u sheloshet harashim ba shofarot, vayishberu hakadim, vayachaziku biyad smolam balapidim, uviyad yaminam hashofarot litkoa, vayikreu cherev la'adonai ulegidon. So the three heads of the companies blew the shofars. They broke their the pitchers. They held with their left hand the torch, and in their right hand the shofar to blow. And they called out, "The sword is for God and Gideon." Now, so Gideon had said in 18 that they should say just for God and Gideon. They're saying the sword for God and Gideon. Okay, we'll see if the commentary says anything about the difference in what they're saying. Right, 21, Vayamdu ish tachtav saviv lamachaneh, vayaratz kol hamachaneh, vayariu vayanusu. Yeah, there's an asterisk there, where between the yud and the samach, and there's a dot in the middle of the yud. That dot is the vowel sound, the oo sound for a vav that's supposed to be there. Okay, so they stood, every person in their place around the camp, and the whole camp ran and shouted and fled. So what did they do? They didn't do anything. They just blew the shofar to scare the living daylights out of them. And they called out, well, Gideon wanted them to call for God and Gideon, but the people called out the sword for God and Gideon. Yes.
So how are they going to hold the sword?
Don't know. They had a shofar in one hand.
Yeah.
And the
vessel, the light.
Who said anything about a sword?
That's what
They called out the sword for God and Gideon. Okay, yes.
Okay.
It turns out they didn't need a weapon. I don't know if they had the weapons, and I don't remember from earlier in the chapter what the 300 men ended up being armed with. 22. Vayitke'u shalosh ma'ot hashofarot, vayasem Adonai et cherev ish bere'ehu, ve'uvechol hamachaneh, vayanas hamachaneh ad beit hashita tsererata, ad sefat e'avel mechola al tabat. So the 300 men blew their shofars, and God put the sword to everyone in the camp, and God set every man's sword against his fellow throughout the host. In other words, all 300 somehow they had the sword. They were able to do some after they blew the shofar. Maybe they took their swords out. Don't know the process here, but they used the swords. Though it doesn't seem like they needed to use them because they were already ran away in verse 21. But I guess the 300 chased after them, and they the whole camp fled to Beit Shita. Just a second. Fled to Beit Shita, which is by Tzerera, or near Avel Mechola, by Tabat. Okay, so all these place names are supposed to help us understand how far the camp fled to, the Midianite camp fled to. 23, Vayitza'ek. So not Vayitz'ak, Vayitza'ek. Ish Yisrael, min Naftali umin Asher umin kol Menashe vayirdefu acharei Midyan. So even though it's 300 men, all the other men of Naphtali and Asher and Menashe chased after the Midianites. Okay, so even though God had Gideon had said, anybody who's afraid, go away. And then the next layer of the test was, let's see how you drink. And then God chose the 300, right? There were 30,000 that he started with, ended up with 300, right? So apparently the other 30,000, the rest of them, came back and chased after the Midianites.
I have a question.
Yes.
Okay, why is the enemy called the host? That was what was confusing me.
Yeah, no, I translated at the camp. It's an older English word.
Okay, thanks.
The host is like it's not the person who hosts a party, but rather the group of people. So in Old English, host is just a group. Okay. God is called the Lord of hosts. That means the Hebrew is Adonai Tzvaot, the God of the armies. So it's just a large group of people in Old English. 24.
Thanks.
Yeah. Umalachim shalach Gidon b'chol har Ephraim lemor ridu likrat Midyan velichdu lahem et hamayim ad Beit Bara v'et hayarden vayitzaek kol ish Ephraim vayilkedu et hamayim ad Beit Bara v'et hayarden. So, and Gideon sent messengers in all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against Midian and take before them the waters." I have no idea what that means. To Beit Bara and the Jordan, and all of the people of Ephraim gathered, and they took the water to Beit Bara and the Jordan. So let me just look at Alter for a second, just to see how he translates this verse 24. Gideon said, "Come down to meet Midian, and from them the water source, and take from them the water sources." Okay, take the water sources. So in other words, make sure the Midian doesn't have any water to drink. Okay, we want to have them die of thirst. Okay, so 25, Vayilkedu shnei sarei Midyan et Orev v'et Ze'ev Vayahargu et Orev Betsur Orev v'et Ze'ev Hargu v'Yakev Ze'ev Vayirdefu el Midyan v'Rosh Orev uZe'ev Heviu el Gidon me'ever layarden. So they took the two officers. It says it's translated as princes. The two officers of Midian, like the two leaders of Midian, Orev and Ze'ev. Now, Orev and Ze'ev happen to be names of animals. An Orev is a raven, and a Ze'ev is a wolf. So just interesting that the Bible here names these people after creatures. Okay, were they really their names? And why would they have Hebrew names? Right, Orev and Ze'ev are good Hebrew names. Are they also Midianite names? So it's just interesting. Anyway, so they grabbed Orev and Ze'ev and killed Orev at the rock of Orev. So I guess it's called the Rock of Orev because that's where they killed Orev. And then it was known from then on as the Rock of Orev. And Ze'ev they killed at Yaakov Ze'ev at the Ze'ev wine press. Okay, so after Orev and Ze'ev were killed, those places where they were named the Rock of Orev and the wine press of Ze'ev. And they pursued Midian, and then they pursued Midian. They kept chasing after them. The heads, so they killed them, but they also decapitated them because they brought the heads of Orev and Ze'ev to Gideon across the Jordan.
Jonah?
Yes.
Is naming the place in memory of the slain generals, or heads, whatever, well, I don't want to say heads now. Isn't that a sign of respect? Memorialization?
I think it's more of a sign of look what the Israelites did and remember our triumph. So it doesn't matter that it's the enemy. I think it's because they were able, 300 men were able to defeat the mighty Midianite army and decapitate the officers. I think that's glory. So name the place. And for that, so yeah, should they have named it some Israelite thing? I don't know. I don't see it as a respect of that. I think it's more everybody's going to remember. Oh yeah, that's where they raised the heads of those princes. So,
Are there other place names named after defeated enemies?
I don't.
I mean, we don't do that nowadays that I can think of.
I don't know. Yeah. Well,
Okay.
so I'm thinking about the Civil War. I'm thinking about the Revolutionary War.
About Brandenburg Gate and Robinson's art. I'm just thinking of American, right, in Europe. I don't.
Right. So it's not, battles in World War I are place names, not people.
Okay.
Revolutionary War, I don't know. The Civil War battles, none of them. They're all places or rivers. They're not. I don't know. Battle of Gettysburg. I don't know. Right. Antietam, Bunker Hill, Lexington and Concord, Yorktown. So I don't know. It's interesting, but I wasn't reacting in the way that you were reacting. So, okay, let's look at the commentary that begins on the bottom of 219, on the bottom right. Encouraged by the dream and its interpretation, Gideon returned with the decision to attack at once. 220, interpretation, literally breaking. The noun shever is not found elsewhere in this sense. In other words, though the way I translated it, that the dream and its interpretation, the word for interpretation, the word is usually means something else. And it only here means interpretation. Kimchi comments that an uninterpreted dream is like a sealed package, and therefore the interpretation may be said to break it open, right? So the word that's used for interpretation usually means to break. So Kimchi, who focuses on the language, says maybe it means interpretation because the interpreter kind of like breaks the seal and understands what the package means, sees the inside of the package and understands it. Worshipped, usually rendered bowed down or prostrated himself. This was in gratitude for the omen which he believed to be the work of God. Right? That the fact that he heard the dream being interpreted meant that to Gideon that God intended him to hear that so that he would know it's time to attack. The strategical plan was simple and effective. The sleeping enemy was to be surrounded on three sides, and the sudden burst of light, accompanied by the trumpet blasts out of the blackness of the night, would spread consternation in the camp. Okay, so I guess that's how we can picture it, that the torches are hidden inside the pitchers, right? So it's kind of like all at once, in the age of electricity, all at once, we're going to flip the switch on all the lights that are on around the camp, and as soon as you blow the shofar, then break the pitchers open so that the torches are revealed, or flip the switch, and all of a sudden, light. It would scare the Midianites. Okay, companies, literally heads. This term is used for divisions, both military divisions as here, and tributaries of a river. Okay. All that are with me, defined in the next verse. For the Lord and for Gideon, the cry indicated their firm belief that the Lord would bring about victory through their leader Gideon. The middle watch, the night, which was reckoned as beginning at 6 p.m., was divided into 3 watches, each of 4 hours. In the Talmud, one rabbi maintained this view, while another argued that there were 4 watches, each of 3 hours, and he explained the phrase "the middle watch" as one of the 2 middle watches. Right. So that the argument in the Talmud is an argument from the very beginning of the Talmud when to say the Shema in the evening, and one of the definitions is till the end of the first watch. So then they have to understand how many watches are there. So does that mean for 3 hours or for 4 hours? Okay. Newly set the watch. The noun in the text signifies sentries. This clause is added to explain why Gideon chose the beginning of the watch. The sentries had just come on duty and they were still drowsy. The sword fort, although not included in verse 18, it formed part of the battle cry as exclaimed in the excitement of the attack. In his place, they had no need to charge the enemy. The confusion they had created would win the battle without further action on their part. Fled, the general direction of the flight was towards the Jordan, but the places mentioned cannot be identified with certainty. They probably lay along the plain of Jezreel and the Jordan Valley towards the middle of its course. Beit Shittah, literally house of acacia. Some authorities identify the town with the modern Shuta, which lies between Shunem and Beit Sha'an. Serera, some equate the name with Sartan. Avel Mechola, the birthplace of Elisha, see 1 Kings 19. Some believe it to be located about 10 miles south of Beit Sha'an, perhaps the modern Ein Helweh. Tabat, the site is unknown. The use of the preposition al, by, literally upon, may possibly indicate that it was a name given to a wadi or stream. News of the victory spread to the other northern tribes who joined the pursuit. The routed Midianites evidently fled southwards to the northeast fords of the Jordan, and at the summons of Gideon, the Ephraimites came down from the hills to intercept their crossing. The waters, the intervening watercourses beside the Jordan mentioned explicitly. Beit Bara, its location is doubtful. Also the Jordan, its main fords. Orev and Ze'ev, the names mean raven and wolf. They may have been designations given to them to describe the fierce traits possessed by the 2 men. Rock of Orev, etc. It's possible that these names were applied after the event to commemorate the fate of the princes. The memory of the defeat survived to the days of Isaiah. See Isaiah 10. So, the days of Isaiah. So, it's also mentioned in Psalm 83. Okay, so that that would mean, let's say this happened around the year 1200 BCE, and Isaiah is in the 770s, something like that, let's say 750 BCE. So this memory lasted 450 years, something like that. So that's a long time in ancient history to have this rock and this wine press associated with the defeat by Gideon of the Midianites. Okay, and then on 223, the last comment there at the top left, beyond the Jordan, literally from beyond, the heads were brought to Gideon from the western side of the river. He had by then, as Rashi explains, crossed the Jordan in pursuit of the two kings of Midian, Zevach and Salmunah. See chapter 8 as this story continues. But before we continue in chapter 8, let's read this section in ancient Israel. Let's turn to page 147 in ancient Israel. In the commentary below, he bowed down. This may be a gesture of obeisance to God, who, as he now confidently knows, is about to make him triumph. He split the 300 men into 3 columns. This move makes it possible for Gideon's men to come down on the Midianite from 3 sides. Perhaps 4 sides would have been even more strategically effective, but that consideration is trumped by the numerical neatness of 300 divided by 3. Look to me and do the same. In the Hebrew, the force of this command is underscored by a rhyme. Mimeni tir'u v'chein ta'asu. Tir'u ta'asu. Okay. On 148 below the line, and all those by me. These would be the 100 men in the column headed by Gideon, as we see in the next verse. For the Lord and for Gideon. Some Hebrew manuscripts add 2 ancient versions. Some Hebrew manuscripts and 2 ancient versions show sword for the Lord, as in verse 20. Right, so there are other manuscripts that reconcile the difference between what Gideon said the people should say and what the people said 2 sentences later by having them say the same thing. Okay, so in our text, Gideon tells them for the Lord and for Gideon, and in verse 20, it'll be for the sword for the Lord. Okay. At the beginning of the middle watch, the night was divided into 3 watches, which here neatly correspond to the tripartite division of Gideon's fighters. So this would be something approaching midnight when the Midianite troops were deep in slumber. They had just then posted the watchmen. Either they have not yet settled into their positions of observation, or they're not yet fully alert because they have just been wakened to take up their watch. Held the torches with their left hand and their right hand the ram's horns. Presumably their swords remain strapped to their sides as they rely entirely on the effect of panic caused by the sudden blaring sound and the torchlight. Okay, Bess, so there's your answer as to where were the swords. Each one stood in his place. These are the horn-blowing, torch-wielding Israelites. The Lord set every man's sword against his fellow, and other accounts of Israelite victories. We're told that the Lord panicked the enemy. Only here do we get the mechanism of the panic, which in fact is a stratagem devised by Gideon to terrorize the sleeping army. Brook, though most translations treat Avel as a proper noun, it means brook, being an alternate form of the more common Yuval. Representing it as a brook clarifies the meaning of banks. The Hebrew sfat is a singular noun. Gideon sent messengers, having routed the large Midianite army with only 300 men. He now rallies behind him a much larger force to pursue the fleeing enemy. Took the water sources in the first instance. They take hold of brooks to the west of the Jordan, where they can readily cut down the Midianites seeking to ford the streams. And then they take hold of the fords of the Jordan itself. The prominence of bodies of water and the destruction of the Midianites loops back to the test of how the Israelite fighters drink water from a stream. Okay, so that's alter being the literary professor that he is, right? He didn't start as a Bible professor. He started as an English professor and then got into biblical commentary. So he's reading the story from a literary perspective and thus framing it with the soldiers being chosen by God as how they drink the water, and now the Midianites being defeated at water. Okay, Orev and Ze'ev, the two names mean respectively raven and wolf. Animal names were common among the Northwest Semites, including the Israelites. Right, and we have that today, in Hebrew. A lot of people named Zev or Naphtali. Usually, if you're Naphtali, sometimes you have the name Hertz added to it, and Hertz is Yiddish for deer. You have Dov Bear, which is literally a bear, B-E-A-R. Aryeh, Aryeh Leib, Label, all of them, Lion. So yeah, it's my name means a dove. So yeah, there are lots of names after birds and animals. Okay.
And then today we have Wolf Blitzer. So I thought that was funny too.
Oh, there you go.
In
So
English.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So,
Teller.
What's Teller?
My grandson, Wolf Teller.
Oh, yes. Okay. I thought you meant the name Teller is also some animal name.
Wolf, but I'm just saying this.
I got it. Yes. They brought to Gideon from across the Jordan. The fleeing Midianite commanders are overtaken and killed east of the Jordan, having eluded the Israelite forces holding the fords. Gideon himself is still on the west side of the Jordan. He will cross it in the next episode in pursuit of the enemy. Okay, chapter 8 is a long chapter. We'll see how far we get with it. Let's see. So let's read the first 3 sentences of chapter 8. Back to page 223 in our text. Vayomru elav ish Ephraim, ma hadavar hazeh asita lanu, levilti krot lanu, ki halachta li'lachem b'Midian v'yirivun ito b'chozka. So the men of Ephraim, remember this is Asher, Naphtali, and Manasseh that Gideon is leading, right? And then as they're pursuing the Midianites, the men of Ephraim gather with them. Okay, so now the men of Ephraim say, what is this? What did you do to us? Without calling us, you went to battle the Midianites and with great force. Yeah, why did you fight the Midianites with great force without calling us? 2, Vayomer Alehem, Me'asita atakachem, Halo Tov Olalot Ephraim, Mibetzir Aviezer. So I need the English to help me here. So he says to them, what have I now done in comparison to you? Me'asiti atakachem. So the ata here is now. What have I done now like you? Is not the gleaning of Ephraim better than the vintage of Aviezer? Let me see what that means. Are not the gleanings of Ephraim grapes better than the vintage of Aviezer? Well, we'll see. Let me just read one more sentence to get to see what he means. Unless is Gideon's name Aviezer? No, he's Avishai. Yeah, okay, just a second. We'll figure this out in a moment. Verse 3, B'yedchem natan Elohim et sarei Midian et Orev et Ze'ev uma yacholti asot kachem. Az rafta ruchame alav b'damro hadavar hazeh. In your hand, God gave the officers of Midian, Orev and Ze'ev. What could I have? I couldn't have done it without you. Then their spirit was weakened against him when he said this thing. So in other words, Ephraim's complaining, why didn't you call us? And Gideon is being nice and said, nobody's grapes are better than Ephraim's grapes. And I couldn't have gotten Orev and Ze'ev without you. You did it. So let's look at the commentary now. Beginning on the left side of 223, as the most powerful tribe in the north, the Ephraimites were resentful of the usurpation by a lesser tribe of the hegemony in their area. Right? They're jealous. Gideon, conscious of his inferior strength, silenced their protest with a tactful reply. They were met with sterner measures later when they raised a similar objection in the time of Yiftach. See chapter 12. Okay, so Ephraim's complaining, why didn't you call us? So, men, the noun is used collectively, the verb is therefore in the plural. Why have you served us thus? Literally, what is this thing that they have done to us? The resentment which they displayed throws a sidelight on the petty jealousies of the time which stood in the way of national unity. Right? Each tribe was jealous for their own, out of their own pride. Sharply, on the right-hand side, we may gather from chapter 12, verse 1, the tone in which they addressed him. Gideon's reply illustrates the proverb, a soft answer turns away wrath. In comparison with you, he asserts that his achievement was insignificant when compared with the daring exploits of the Ephraimites. Gleaning the small grapes left over after the vintage, he implied that the part played by Ephraim, though less spectacular than the initial victory of Aviezer, was of decisive importance in the ultimate success of the campaign. There was some truth in Gideon's compliment, because if the fords of the Jordan had not been seized in time, the fruits of the first success would have been lost. Some commentators think that the metaphor means the weakest of the Ephraimites are better than the most heroic of the Aviezerites. Vintage, the dagesh, that's the dot, is omitted in the bet, which is rare. The effect is a softening of the sound and may be intended to represent the mildness of Gideon's tone of voice. Okay, so that's the very last Hebrew word on page 223. There's an asterisk above the letter vet in the word mivitzir. And the commentary is pointing out that grammatically, there should be a dot in the letter vet to make it a B sound. So instead of mivitzir, it should be mibitzir. Okay? So they're suggesting that the taking the dot out of the letter vet is intentional and represents exactly what Gideon said. So he's softening his tone, not just in the words, but in how he's saying it. So instead of mi bitzir, mi vitzir sounds a little softer. Okay. And then verse 3, this verse explains the metaphor. Into your hand, in the Hebrew, this comes at the beginning of the sentence for emphasis. All right, let's see what Alter says about this on page 150. What have I done now to you? The received text says like you, but many manuscripts show to, literally in or against. An error in copying may have been triggered by what could I have done like you in verse 3. Okay. He's just commenting on the grammar and the Hebrew, how the Hebrew is written. Are not the gleanings of Ephraim's grapes better than the vintage of Aviezer? Gideon now exhibits a new skill as a leader, the shrewd use of persuasive rhetoric. The Ephraimites had been resentful because Gideon did not summon them to fight in the first stage of the conflict with Midian. He responds with a pointed aphorism that would have spoken to any viticulturalist, that is, a grape person. Ephraim, having been responsible for the capture and execution of Orev and Ze'ev, is so much superior to Gideon's clan, Aviezer, that the stray grapes it leaves behind in the harvest are better than what Aviezer actually harvests in the vineyard. Right? So Gideon is from the family of Aviezer, and he's saying Ephraim is so much better. The grapes of Ephraim are so much better than the grapes of Aviezer. That you are so much better than me. Look what you were able to do. You were able to decapitate those chiefs. Okay, let's do 4 to 9. So we're back to page 224. Vayavo Gidon Hayardena, Over hu ushlosh me'ot ha'ish asher ito, ayefim verodfim. So Gideon came to the Jordan. He crossed it, and he and his 300 men with him. They were tired, yet they were still pursuing. 5, Vayomer la'anshe Sukkot, Tenuna ki karot lechem la'am asher beraglai, ki ayefim heim, va'anochi rodef acharei zevach v'tzalmuna malchei Midian. So, he said, Gideon said to the men of Sukkot, please give some loaves of bread to the people with me because they are tired. They're famished, I would say. You can translate it that way. And I'll keep on chasing after Zevach and Salmunah, the kings of Midian. 6, Vayomer Sarei Sukkot, Hachaf Zevach v'Tzalmunah ata biyadecha, ki nitein litziv'acha lachem. So the officers of Sukkot said, are the hands of Zevach and Salmunah now in your hands because that we should give your army bread? So in other words, do you really think you're going to be able to get them? 7, Vayomer Gidon lachein beteit Adonai et Zevach v'et Salmunah biyadi v'dashti be'et besarchem et kotzei hamidbar ve'et habark kanim. And Gideon said, therefore, when the Lord gives, when God gives Zevach and Salmunah into my hand, then I will tear your flesh with the thorns of the wilderness and with briars. So in other words, if you don't give us bread, and I end up being able to get Zevach and Salmunah, boy, are you going to get it. You're going to be tortured. 8, Vaya'al misham Penuel, Vayidaber aleihem kazot, Vaya'anu oto, Anshe Penuel, Ka'asher anu Anshe Sukkot. Vayomer gam la'anshe Penuel lemor b'shuvi v'shalom et tots et hamigdal hazeh. Then from Sukkot he went to Penuel and said the same thing to them, and the people of Penuel said the same thing that the people of Sukkot said, and then Gideon said the same thing to the people of Penuel. When I return in peace, I will break down this tower. Okay, so he has warnings for the people of Sukkot and the people of Penuel. Just wait till you see. For the fact that you refuse to give us bread, you'll be punished. So let's look at the comments here on the bottom of 224. And passed over, literally passing over, the participle is more descriptive, though less usual. The 300 men, his army had not increased, and he did not wish it to do so. The same small band who had put the Midianite host to flight continued the campaign to the end. Yet pursuing to capture the Midianite kings, Zevach and Salmunah, who were devastating the Israelite lands across the Jordan in the course of their flight, and had apparently put Gideon's brothers to death. See verse 19, which we haven't read yet. Sukkot, for the origin of the name, see Genesis 33. Kimchi maintains that the word is connected with the Hebrew for thorns. According to the Jerusalem Talmud, it is identified with Deir Allah, known today as Tel Deir Allah, on the northern bank of the Yabok. Okay, loaves, round, flat cakes. The word means circles. Kikar. Well, so kikar. So in modern Hebrew, a kikar is the town square or the town circle. So there are a number of uh, European cities are built around these plazas. So the plaza would be in Hebrew a kikar. So more of a circular plaza as opposed to a square plaza. Okay. Zevach, the name, if Hebrew and not Midianite, means sacrifice or slaughter. Salmunah, by a wordplay, the name is taken to signify shadow withheld. That is, protection refused, but it's doubtless of Midianite origin. Princes, this is the usual rendering of the word. Here it probably denotes officials, the heads of the council of elders. Rashi's assertion that they were Israelites makes their refusal the more culpable and indicates the deterioration that had set in among the Transjordanian tribes since Joshua's death. Perhaps they feared that the battle was not yet won, and they feared retaliations from the Midianites. So it's unclear who these towns, Sukkot and Penuel, are. Are they Israelite towns, meaning are they from the half-tribe of Manasseh, Gad, and Reuven on the other side of the Jordan, or are they other people? So Rashi's suggesting that they are of Reuben, Gad, and half of Manasseh, and shows that their refusal to give bread goes against what they had promised Moses back in the Torah. We'll with you all the time, even though we're on this side of the Jordan, we'll be with you in your battles. Rashi's saying here's an example of how they're not doing that. Hands, literally palm, perhaps used figuratively for power. 225, that we should give. There's a note of derision in their refusal. They scoff at the idea of 300 men overpowering the mighty kings of Midian. Tear, literally thresh, that is, strike with violence. Others explain that he threatened to throw them naked into a bed of thorns and trample them together like grain on the threshing floor. So just because of the word that's used here for the thrashing, because it's also a word used for threshing. Briars, the cognate noun in Arabic, denotes a plant with thorny heads. Gideon's sharp retort showed that, when occasion demanded, he could be as stern as he had been conciliatory with Ephraim. Penuel, see Genesis 32. This was a place of importance rebuilt by Jeroboam in 1 Kings. It lay farther from the Jordan than Sukkot and higher up in the hills. It's variously sought at Tulul Ed Dahab, cone-shaped hills about 250 feet above the Yabok Valley, or at Kalat or Rabat. Tower, the stronghold which formed a refuge in time of danger for the inhabitants of unwalled cities. Let's look at altar on these verses 4 to 9. Back on page 150. The Midianite kings. It's probable that Midian would have more than one king, so the term appears to be used loosely here to mean leader. Is the palm of Zevach and Salmunah already in your hand? Given the extended period during which the Israelites were painfully vulnerable to the Midianites, the town elders don't really believe that Gideon will subdue this enemy. And so, in fear of Midianite retribution, they do not want to offer him aid. Amit proposes that the palm is mentioned because of a practice attested among the Egyptians of slicing off the palms of a defeated enemy. Ugh. I will harrow your flesh with thorns. This fierce declaration, the literal sense of the Hebrew verb used as thresh, and of the matching one to the elders of Penuel, is less a matter of personal vengeance than of military justice. The failure to give provisions to an army that is in desperate need is an act of treason and will be punished as such. Okay, it's 10:24. We'll stop here for today. Wish everybody a good rest of the day and a Shabbat Shalom. And we will meet next Friday. Yeah, we're on for the next several Fridays. Yeah, I'm just not sure about the Friday during Passover. If my family is still in town, I might be doing something with them in the morning. So that's the 26th, April 26th is still a question. But otherwise, we're on for every Friday until Memorial Day weekend. And that Memorial Day weekend will be the end of this year's class, and we'll be off then until right after Labor Day. Okay? So just a heads up about that. Have a good rest of the day. Take care, everybody.
Shabbos.
Shabbat shalom. Shakowach, Jonah.